Kia ora koutou, ko Sarah Edwards Lokoingwa, and I am an environmental social scientist at Waitaha, BSI, what was Manaki Whenua Land Research.
Kia ora koutou, ko Siwing Tako Ingoa. I'm a wildlife ecologist at the Wildlife Ecology and Management team, also at BSI, and both Sarah and I are based in Lincoln, actually just down the road.
And we're speaking on behalf of a larger team of researchers that have been working on a number of cat-related research projects over the years. We're going to be talking about one based on the Ashley Rakahuri River today. And importantly, we work in this project in particularly in a very interdisciplinary way. So I'm a social scientist, as I mentioned before. My colleague Susanna Finlay-Smith is also a social scientist. And as Siwing mentioned just there, we're also working together with ecologists. So our goal in this research is really to integrate those different disciplinary approaches to provide insights into social and ecological aspects of cat management, particularly in this case, as they relate to the Ashley Rakahuri River. But to provide some context to this research and give an idea of what I'm sure a number of you are aware about in relation to cats in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Cats are an introduced predator. They were brought here by humans, which is why I'm using the term introduced quite deliberately. And they can decimate populations of native species, including nesting birds on braided river systems. But they're also much loved and valued companion animals as well. So the latest CAN survey put the number of companion pet cats at approximately 1.26 million, with 40% of households owning at least one cat. So we are a nation of cat lovers, whilst there are also very clear environmental ecological impacts of cats in the country as well. And those tensions have played out over the years in the popular media and in research contexts as well. So if we go back 10, 15 years, I'm sure a number of us can remember all the cat controversy that Gareth Morgan just seemed to love stirring with his calls to kind of basically eradicate cats from the country. Things did obviously die down a bit after that, but cats have been in the news a lot over recent years, but with more nuance attached to that. And we're seeing a greater recognition now of the need to manage cats and their behaviours in our ecosystems, whilst also recognising that we want to be able to keep them as companion animals as well. And this has culminated in recent years with growing calls for a more coherent approach to cat management in this country that not only protects native wildlife, but also promotes cat welfare as well. So seeing it as a win-win rather than an either-or. Is where we're kind of situating ourselves here. And then with, just to give a bit more idea of what we mean by cats and cat management in the country, just to go into some of what already is in place, all cats in Aotearoa New Zealand are one species, essentially, domestic cats, Felis catus, but they are categorised in many, many, many different ways depending on who you're talking to. But in legislation and the common categories that often refer to that legislation, we use the term companion cat to refer to our pet cats that live in our homes with us. Stray cats, companion cats that have been lost or abandoned and still rely on humans for their welfare, directly or indirectly. And then there's feral cats, which is kind of what we were wanting to focus on in this project, as we'll get onto in a minute. These are cats that do not rely on humans for their subsistence needs. They're separate from the companion cat population. They tend not to live around areas of human habitation, but ultimately they're still domestic cats, is an important thing to remember. And these categories defined in the Animal Welfare Act are in many ways social constructions. Cats themselves don't identify necessarily with one of those categories. We tend to put them in them. But we can see in existing legislation that does relate to cats, and there's a multitude of different laws and plans and policies that relate to cats, we can see they kind of follow these broad categories. So of particular relevance to what we'll be talking about today, and we've heard a bit about already, local bylaws under the Local Government Act, enacted by territorial authorities, can control, they tend to focus on companion and stray cat populations, whereas regional pest management plans under the Biosecurity Act, which regional councils can bring in, they can control feral cats. But there's a very piecemeal approach across the country as to whether or not these statutory mechanisms are enacted. And then recently we heard in the news at the end of last year that feral cats have been added to the predator-free 2050 species list. So there has been some movement there. But we went into this project wanting to focus more and get into a bit more detail about feral cat management, particularly at the regional level, and particularly in the Canterbury context, where, as Seawing mentioned, we're at our team, a number of us are based at the Lincoln office. We've been doing research in Wellington, Auckland, and other places, but we wanted to look at these complexities surrounding feral cat management in Canterbury. So we reached out to Environment Canterbury and just want to extend thanks to Frances Schmeickel for her help with really helping us scope out this project at the start and to get an idea of some of the issues they were experiencing. Frances put us in contact with a number of conservation groups and other individuals around the region to try and better understand those complexities, including the Ashley Rakahuri Rivercare Group, who led to the selection of our case study site, and were really instrumental in that. So huge thanks to Grant and Emily, who are here today in particular, and other members of the Rivercare Group, who really helped us get that project up and running, and as Seawing will mention, helped us with data collection a lot as well. And importantly, in those conversations, we had to broaden our focus beyond feral cats due to the peri-urban context that we found ourselves in. So the Ashley Rakahuri River flows to the north of Rangiora, shown in that photo there. The particular monitoring site that we focused on was very close to human habitation. So going back to those categories before, feral cats tend not to be found near areas of human habitation, but we necessarily did have to consider other types of cats, as we'll go on to explain. And as I alluded to before, our objectives in this project was really to weave together those social and ecological factors that influence cat populations on the river, to really unpick those in a lot of detail rather than focus on just social or ecological. And also to think about, well, what could some management interventions be in this context that would promote the welfare of native wildlife and cats. So going back to that both and goal rather than an either or. Again, yeah, we're using an interdisciplinary approach, and importantly, mixed methods that crossed qualitative and quantitative methods, as Seawing and I will go on to explain in a minute, ecological monitoring and semi-structured interviews, which we will now explain.
So in the last breeding season, between November and March, we conducted a trail camera monitoring study at the Ashley Rakahuri River. The map shows basically our study site, which is approximately 2 to 3 kilometers on the eastern side of Rangiora. So our setup have 2 transect lines, camera transects. One's lines in the southern banks and one line along the northern banks. And we also put a few cameras out on the islands where there are birds breeding as well. So in this same area, there was a colony of black-billed gulls, and there's also some whitebills and black-fronted terns breeding there as well. And after collecting all the data from the cameras, what we did is we looked into relative abundance indexes of the cats trying to see actually also their movements, whether they're crossing the different rivers, where their activity index actually differs between the different river banks, and whether some of the cats are more problematic that they visit the bird breeding islands. And we also actually looked into the abundance of rabbits and hares as well as a major prey species for cats. So maybe they are drawing the cats in. And we use the same data. We also try to estimate actually what is the actual absolute cat abundance, the population densities in the area. And I talked about the cat activity patterns across the whole area. And as Sarah mentioned, we also utilize the camera trap data collected by the Rivercare groups. They have monitored more than bird nests actually in the area. So we cross-checked our data with them basically to see if we can draw some insights from both sides.
And then at the same time as the camera monitoring study, we were also conducting semi-structured interviews with people who were working in a professional or voluntary capacity in a role that directly related to cat management. So we weren't doing a survey of cat owners or anything like that. These were experts basically in cat management. So these were people at regional and district council, conservation volunteers, and importantly also community cat carers. So these are people who work with basically stray cat communities. They work in a voluntary capacity. Many of them are trapping cats as well, even though I would imagine there's probably not anybody in this room who works in that capacity because they tend to get divided off from conservationists. But we'll talk about that in a minute as well. And just a note on the limitation of the study is that we weren't able to engage with Ngāi Tuahuriri during the period of data collection, so that we recognise that that's a limitation and would like to remedy that in the future. But it was, very tight timeframes, and we didn't have a direct contact that we could sort of engage through easily. When we spoke to people, so this is a semi-structured interview format. It wasn't like a survey where there's fixed questions. We were generally talking to people about their professional or voluntary role, how that related to cat management, their experiences in that role, the challenges they faced, and then importantly, what recommendations from their point of view were needed in this space. We recorded and fully transcribed those interviews and coded them. So this is different to any kind of statistical analyses, which is what I've mainly seen in the presentations today. That's not how we get our kind of rigor in this kind of analysis. It's more to do with the depth of sort of exploration of those codes and then drawing out themes across those codes. So that's the process of analysis and now analysing that data.
So let's talk a little bit about what we got actually from the cat monitoring data at the river. So on the map shows the relative abundance indexes of the cats, but the most interesting patterns is that it seems that the cat activities are much higher along the southern banks compared to the northern banks, and it might be because of different land use patterns. We don't really have the answers there, but we see these patterns where there are more cats in the south. And when we looked into the actual number of individual cats, so we identified them individually, and similar patterns, there is more cats in the southern banks compared to the northern banks, and in total we actually identified 13 cats. And we didn't actually get much cat detection on the island. We didn't have a lot of camera coverage. There's only 6 cameras on the island, and it's focusing on trying to capture the cats instead of monitoring the nest. So that might be one reason that we might be missing some of the cats actually that visit the islands. Some of the certain sites have more cats compared to the others. And also interestingly, the results from population density of cats, we actually, in this area, we got more than 1 cat per square kilometers. It's a pretty good estimate with confidence intervals between 1.09 to 1.37. But an interesting thing is it's actually a much higher number compared to the Rakaia and Rangitata, where I've got some data from Anne, who was presenting earlier. Also model the population densities there, and in there, the cat densities is actually lower than 0.5 cats per square kilometers. But it's not really unexpected because this is a site that is in a peri-urban area. So you would expect to see more cats basically. And interestingly, for these kind of population models, they also tells you an estimate of what is the actual home range size of the animals. And the animals in this area have a home range size of almost 2 square kilometers. So again, these cats can come from the lifestyle box around the area, the farms around the area, and they are also totally capable actually to walk from all the way from Rangiora to this study site because again, it's just 2-3 kilometers away. And looking more into the details, we also found some companion cats. We detected some companion cats actually along the southern river bank. As usual, you can't really say for sure when a cat is not wearing a collar, whether it's a feral, whether it's a stray, or whether it's an owned cat. But at least for this instance, the cat is wearing a collar, so we know that it's an owned cat, a companion cat. And we also looked into actually what is the peak activity patterns, what's the time during the day that we detected most of the cats. And it's mostly during midnight, but there's also a small peak in late afternoons. And Alisa was mentioning about curfews, like potential curfews of cats during nighttime. That might help if most of these cats are companion cats, but if it's stray or ferals, it might not actually help much. And for predation events, these are actually pictures captured by the Rivercare's cameras set at the bird nest. And throughout, during our monitoring study period of time, we only got one predation event. Actually, on the left is a cat that predated on black-billed gull. The track is still in the egg, actually. And at the same time, we also caught a cat visiting a white-billed nest. But interestingly, this cat didn't do anything to the nest. It visited the nest, it sniffed the eggs, and then it walked away, and the birds actually came back after a few minutes to incubate again. But just want to raise the point that sometimes the direct predation is not only the only impact that cats could have on birds. We have a previous studies up in Auckland, the Omaha Shore Bird Sanctuary, where the non-lethal impacts, we call them non-direct impacts of the cats is actually much higher than the direct predation impacts, because in that study site, we have a cat that visits every single nest that we have monitored, and it visits the nest every other day. And in that study site, only 2 of the eggs has hatched. Those are New Zealand dotterels, and those 2 actually did not fledge at the end of the day. So it's also important to look into actually the non-lethal impacts of cats as well. And I mentioned that we looked into hares and rabbits, and the patterns of hare and rabbits actually fits quite well with the cat patterns as well, where there is more of rabbits on the southern bank. So that also results in a question, thinking whether these rabbits might be drawing cats in, and could bottom-up control by controlling the rabbit, the major prey of the cats, can actually help reduce cat intrusion as well, which is actually one of the things that Auckland Council is doing at the study site that I just mentioned.
So the monitoring data that Sea-Wing has just gone through gives us a really rich picture of those cat populations. But what we wanted to do through the interviews was layer that with social aspects that not only draw the cats in, but give us an idea of where these cats are coming from and what they're doing. So one of the interesting themes that came through when we were analysing the data is this idea of how cats are categorised by people working in and around that area. So that typology I introduced earlier, feral, stray and companion, as Sea-Wing mentioned, you can't tell by looking at a cat, unless it's got a collar on, you really can't tell with any certainty what type of cat it is. And that really came through in our interviews. People were using other terms to refer to them, particularly the stray, the companion cat care, sorry, the community cat carers, so that the volunteers that work with these stray cats. They described cats on the river as semi-social, semi-domesticated, unsocial, wildies, somewhere in this in-between space. It doesn't matter really if they're feral, stray or companion, they've kind of got these kind of character traits. And they also mentioned that there are a number of barn cats found in these areas. They live throughout this setting on farms, lifestyle blocks. They're kind of like stray cat colonies in urban areas. They take up a lot of time for these community cat carers as they try to manage those numbers down and control them, because they're often not desexed, but they are kind of semi-owned. And then conservation volunteers also highlighted the impacts of problematic individual cats. And we saw a picture there earlier that Si Wing showed. These cats are not going into traps, but they are predating on nests and birds, and they're evading those traps. So that's another way we can categorize cats. Also importantly, people throughout the area are supporting cat populations. So Si Wing mentioned about hares and rabbits might be drawing the cats in, but also urban areas are a source of those cats. There might be that people are dumping cats out at the river. So that image there just shows again how close Rangiora is to the Ashley River. There was, varying reports on dumping, and we can't tell that for sure. But there were also reports of people leaving cats behind at rental properties. They have to move and they're not allowed to take their pet with them. Sometimes they leave them behind, and those cats then migrate out to the river as strays. But human activities along the river also attract cats to them in the way that hares and rabbits might do. They might be drawn to recreational facilities along the river. So one community cat carer pointed out she was often finding cats over by the BMX track, which is circled in red there. There's waste there, food, because there's a picnic area. Cats go there and they can be supported indirectly by humans in that area. Dumped animal carcasses from hunters that are just dumped on the river. People are not thinking about cats at all, but cats and other predators go, eat the carcass. When that's exhausted, they turn to the birds. And then importantly, lifestyle blocks, farms, forests support cats, these unowned cat populations in the area. So one community cat carer pointed out she's constantly every year she gets called out to this property because they've got more cats there that need to be trapped and taken away. But it's because it happens to be near dairy farms, near forests, near the river. And so it's just this perfect environment for supporting cats. Not the fault of the landowner, but more to do with land use around it. And then finally, thinking about how we manage cats in this area and what we could do. There's a general absence of mandated cat management practices in the area, as we've mentioned before. There's no national cat management plan. There's no regional pest management plan containing feral cats in it. And there's no local bylaws that govern cats in this area at the moment. And many people talked about the need in particular for this local bylaw to mandate microchipping registration and desexing. And importantly, with or without any enforcement by council, just having a bylaw would support the activity of both conservation volunteers and community cat carers, because they'd be able to, number one, tell if a cat was owned or not, and number two, they'd be enabled to desex or potentially euthanize a cat that was trapped. But at the moment, they've got no legal grounds to do so. So in many ways, that's the enforcement side that comes with that. But there's no political leadership in this space at the moment. And going back to the elephant in the room that's been mentioned a number of times, we recognise it's a very turbulent space in that area, but it is needed. Trapping cats is a common tool used by community cat carers and conservation volunteers, but there's lots of complexities around that. As we've talked about before, problematic cats can evade capture, but also what do you do with a cat trapped in a live capture trap? Do you take it to the vets? How do you take it to the vets? Some vets won't allow trapped cats right through the main door. Do you euthanize the cat? How do you do that? How do you do that humanely? There's all sorts of issues. So trapping alone is not the only solution we need here. So moving on then to conclusions and recommendations and what we can do about this. The immediate issue being, how can we stop cats predating on nesting birds along the river. As we just said there, trapping is complex and may not be effective. So an alternative approach could be, as Siweng will explain, non-lethal deterrence and bottom-up control.
So just want to introduce two pieces of work that our team has developed, like on non-lethal cat management tools. So the first piece of work was developed by Grant Norbury, who some of you might know, who has recently retired. And this tool is called misinformation. And what they did in this study is they spread bird scent everywhere. It's actually tested also in another Braided River system in the Mackenzie area. And they spread bird scent everywhere right before the bird breeding seasons, basically trying to track the predators in thinking that when they go investigate the bird scent, there is nothing there. So they do not get the rewards. And it continues through the whole breeding seasons. And from their results, of course, as with all the animal manipulation studies, there's always habituation observed. So the interaction times between the predators and the scent declined over time. But however, still with that breeding seasons, there was a 1.7-fold increase in hatching success. And that was on oystercatcher, whitebill, and banded plovers. And from population studies, population modeling, they also find 127% increase in population size in around 25 years of time. And the other piece of work I'm involved with is developing a audio deterrent that can scare cats away by using some sounds that they might find scary. And what we found is it seems like cats would flee actually more than 60% of the time when they're exposed to just human talking sounds. This is quite similar to some of the conservation group who would actually guard doctoral nests during the night. They just sit there and try to scare cats away, similar concepts. And also we tried actually cat fighting sounds when cats are yowling at each other. It seems to be quite a useful sounds as well, that they deter more than 40% of the cats. And again, there is problem of habituations where cats stop responding to the sounds when they are exposed to these sounds more than 5 times. But the point is most of them actually never return after their first exposure. And some of them return, most of them only return maximum once. So it seems in that case, they wouldn't even reach the threshold of being exposed for 5 times. But then again, none of these methods is a silver bullet. It's likely if we want to manage cats, we need to integrate many different methods, non-lethal control, we need to trap, and potentially control their prey. As mentioned before, can we control the rabbits and try to stop drawing them in?
Yeah, and just I realise we're over time. Final points. Yeah, there's no silver bullet to this, and there's also just focusing on the short term is we need to do more than that as well. So the longer term issue is to reduce the overall population of free roaming cats on the river. And currently volunteers both at the Rivercare Group and other conservation groups in the area, but also community cat carers, importantly. They're on the same side and they're often working together. I think that's important to point out. They're the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff here. So we do need a joined up statutory approach that, as I said before, it needs political leadership. Not sure how likely that is at the moment. But we also need to look beyond cats specifically. Other pests are involved, but also target the social reasons for why the cats are there in the first place. So some of those are cat related. So responsible cat ownership practices for one, but also some are unrelated, like land use, hunting practices, etc. So we need to take all of these factors into account as we try to manage this situation. And just to end, again, thank you again to Francis, Grant and Emily for their help in getting this project up and running. And yeah, we're putting together a report that's got much more detail on all of this, so please contact us if you'd like a copy.